Welcome to this Bitcoin price update for July. Please remember I'm doing this video just for fun and speak to a financial advisor. So for a time period of over a decade, the Bitcoin price has gone through a number of bubbles, each representing time periods where a large amount of new money has come flooding in to buy Bitcoin as an increasing customer base arose. Initially, we had Mt. Gox being the first widely used exchange, although Bitcoin wasn't really that well known about overall. Then we got to 2017. We had exchanges like Coinbase and Kraken introducing Bitcoin to a much larger flood of kind of internet geeks. In 2021, we had the start of significant institutional investment into Bitcoin, plus the strange situation after 2020 where the M2 money supply expanded rapidly, which also would have helped out with this bubble. And now, as we come to 2025, it seems to be ETFs as well as public companies as well, thanks to new US regulations, which seem to be providing the new expanding circle of money flooding into buying Bitcoin. The ETFs have only been around since just before 2024. And you can see how the increase of money invested in these ETFs does seem to rhyme with the Bitcoin price. Also, with the increase in companies as well becoming apparent, particularly in recent months. And so this is why I prescribe the current bubble as mainly round to the ETFs and also public companies. It really is remarkable that going back to 2013 had a cycle high exactly 16 quarters, 2 times in a row. And so if it happens again, that will be 3 times in a row. And we're only 1/4 away from that. And so although it would be very unwise to treat that as a certainty, it certainly is a good kind of base case to work from. In terms of the cycles, I've plotted them here. And what was interesting was the last one in 2020 was actually a bit of an anomaly, because more usually you get this classic pattern that we saw with the 2017 bubble, but we didn't kind of get that last time. I think that with the last cycle, you had a mixture of the ridiculous headwinds and then tailwinds that began with the 2020 Wuhan outbreak. But then layered on top of that, you had China banning mining, then leading to this kind of whimperish pattern. Well, as of the state of play for 2025, we are actually looking more like the classic bull market of 2017 than with what happened in 2020. I'd say that isn't completely confirmed, but it will be within the next couple of months. So although I'd caution that yes, something like this could still happen if we are topping out about now, when you just visually look at the cycles lined up against each other, it really does start to look quite compelling now that we're in for a classic cycle pattern. I've used the wonderful website bitinfocharts.com to look at the age of Bitcoin wallets for all the Bitcoin in circulation. And that's how then I've generated this pie chart. We see that 15% of all Bitcoin is either from the early kind of Satoshi mining days, or is lost Bitcoin because it's been held for over 3 cycles. Only 8% has been held for 2 cycles, and only 18% has been held for 1 cycle. So that meaning it's been held for longer than around here. So actually, a surprisingly large amount of Bitcoin is liquid, has been held for less than a cycle. And that's good to track, because if we were moving towards the end of a bull cycle, you'd expect to see Bitcoin flowing from the hodlers and the diamond hands to liquid Bitcoin. And although there has been some of that over the last year, it's still actually relatively stable overall. There's not been any big changes to be observed on this chart. 11% of the Bitcoin is retail on exchanges, 2% held by countries, 3% by MicroStrategy, and 3% by companies other than MicroStrategy, with 7% held by the ETFs. There's kind of a remarkably large amount of unknown liquid Bitcoin where I can't attribute who the owners are. And I wonder if this is rich people outside the system, perhaps in Asian countries and Russia and things like that. Here we have the ETF flows versus the price of Bitcoin, and you can see a clear correlation there. And here we've got the ETF assets under management in US dollars, and then how much BTC the ETFs are holding. And you can see a clear positive trend there. Here I've got a table, and we definitely see a bullish trend established. In terms of the ETFs, up 2% in the last month, depending on which source you use. Companies up a impressive 11% this month, including MicroStrategy, who are up 3%. So this is looking very favorable for BTCers. I've got here the overall summary for that, and you can see particular action with the public companies, and that's mirrored with this slide here, where we've seen ever since March a nice positive trend for the ETFs in terms of number of Bitcoin held, but things almost start looking spicy in terms of the companies. And actually the Bitcoin price, which I've rebased to kind of fit the scale, you could actually say the Bitcoin price has underwhelmed versus the real data we see here. It's almost like we've got retail actually panicking and the Bitcoin exchanging hands from retail to the ETFs and companies. Some of this, though, could also be individuals preferring to just own an ETF or own MicroStrategy or something rather than having their Bitcoin held in cold storage. That could also kind of explain why the price hasn't gone up despite these two trends. But digging down into my raw data here, we have seen a trend in the last month of Bitcoin flowing from retail and exchanges to companies. Here we see how from February of last year, there's been a continual trend of people taking their Bitcoin, of retail taking their Bitcoin off exchanges. Here I'll be tracking MicroStrategy, and we see that they managed to raise another 1 billion in June to buy more Bitcoin. In terms of countries, we don't really see any change. In terms of companies, though, there's been a lot of action in June. Of particular interest is 21 Capital. So this is a new kind of equity-based Bitcoin company who are really a bit of a copy of MicroStrategy. But it's impressive that they used a SPAC to launch. And it's interesting how they've gone from nowhere to in 1 month they've got 37,000 Bitcoin. So that's very significant. Plus all the other holders, there's been some significant gainage of Bitcoin in June. I get this data off bitbo.io. You can see a lot of action in June and a lot more companies. Now, a lot of these are kind of techie companies that have just started jumping on the bandwagon. But there's also a lot of dead zombie or just total basket case companies who are probably going to go bust anyway. So they've just put everything they've got into Bitcoin as a kind of survival strategy and flip the company into just a Bitcoin company. And although that's degenerate behavior, it is actually a bullish thing for Bitcoin. You know, it just suggests that there's a bit of a bandwagon that all and sundry now are starting to jump upon, which really would be great for BTC bubble base case. In terms of private companies, there's been no movement with the big caps, but there has actually been some activity with some of the smaller companies. So I've been tracking some KPI just to kind of keep our feet on the ground if the moonshot does happen. In terms of the cycle, it's looking great. In terms of ETF flows and flows of Bitcoin into companies, those are actually very impressive in June, with 2% positive flows for ETFs and 11% for companies. MicroStrategy are still able to raise equity to buy Bitcoin, even though in the case of MicroStrategy, it's not very good terms for equity holders versus bond holders. And for my too good to be true meters, in terms of M2 money supply, the S&P 500 and ETF assets under management, the BTC market cap and BTC ETF market caps aren't looking too outrageous at the moment. So with the ousting of Elon Musk's Doge and the apparent entry into a new phase of fiscal indiscipline with the big beautiful bill, things do actually look quite lined up in a way that dovetail with this cycle pattern that we've had before. And so things are looking very bullish for Bitcoin. I've discovered this megaphone formation, and we really could see things get looking really spicy. And whether this would be the top or whether you get support above the megaphone, all options are possible there. But things do look quite well set up for that based on the data that I'm tracking. And it also then fits in well with the current fiscal indiscipline narrative of the US. So we're in for a good kind of bull case and exciting end to the year, I'd say. The bearish argument, and I've still got this 52-week moving average here, which has worked very well up to now, and I think would be a good bear case safeguard. But the bear case would be based around the fact that we have seen a movement of Bitcoin from retail to companies and MicroStrategy. So it could be that the price is the same now as where it was at the start of the year, adjusted for inflation, because you just had an exchange of the Bitcoin from one place to the other. And so although it could look really bullish from this, the reality is we could actually be at a knife's edge in a way that would take a lot of people by surprise. So we're not out of the woods yet, but if you're a glass half full guy, we could be in for a nice moonshot here. Just make sure you speak to your financial advisor. So that completes my video. I hope you found it useful, and speak to you at the next one. I do videos like this one just for fun as a hobby. It's for entertainment purposes only. Always consult a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decision.